and welcome to Chaplain's Compass. My name is John Betts.
And I'm Elise Tremaine, and today I am very excited to talk to Kate Meyer, who's a chaplain and a licensed professional counselor. And she's the author of Navigating the Waves of Grief, Healing Prompts and Reflections to Move You Forward. And her first book on grief, which is Faith Doesn't Erase Grief, Embracing the Experience and Finding Hope. And she's also written a couple of fiction novels, so she's a prolific writer. But also, I'm excited to talk to you today, Kate, because grief is so much a part of what we do as chaplains. And that's not something that we've talked a lot about in the podcast. So, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Specifically to this audience. This is really exciting to me to be kind of speaking to this niche. It's my big goal.
So, we always like to start with this question, which is just tell us about your journey, your story. How did you come into chaplaincy and then also becoming a counselor and doing bereavement counseling?
I came into chaplaincy kicking and screaming. Okay. I came into ordained ministry kicking and screaming. I didn't want to go to seminary. God doesn't give up, right? God is relentless. And so I went to Hope College, and I knew that's where I was going to go. I knew that's where I was supposed to go. I just didn't know why. And so I went thinking youth ministry, and I did that. And I was like, well, this is great, but I don't want to do this forever. Kudos to the people who do. That was not me. Then I did some summer camp stuff. Loved that. Didn't want to do that forever. And then it was during one of those experiences that it was really seminaries next. And God and I, for that whole summer, no, I'm not doing that. And then it was, okay, I'll go, but I won't go to Western Theological Seminary in Holland, because it was literally across a sidewalk from Hope College. And I was like, I'm not doing that. And God was like, well, sorry, but you are. So, of course, that's where I ended up. So, the one thing that I said adamantly no to, that I turned out to be correct on, that I discerned correctly, was that I was not going to be in a church, because I really didn't want to do that. And that was a true part of my call, and discovered my first kind of step into chaplaincy was at a nursing home. Fell in love with it. It was the first experience of ministry that I had on day one. This I could do for the rest of my life. This is, there's something about this that just resonates. So that evolved into healthcare, chaplaincy, throughout the years. And then eventually I went back to school and got a master's in counseling, because there are just some questions, some situations that seminary does not prepare you for. Meanwhile, I got into hospice spiritual care. And so then there was this day where there was a merging of the ordination and the counseling degree and license. And I had this moment of, oh, here it is. This is it, right? This is the thing that I did all of that stuff for. This is the purpose. This is the call. This is my soul work. That's what I now call the grief stuff. This is the soul work. So I kind of stumbled into all of it. I don't think that's what God would say, but that's how I feel about it. I stumbled into all of it. It's never exhausting. That's how I know it's my soul work, because it probably, I don't know, a lot of people would say it should be exhausting, but it's not. It's fulfilling. It's energizing for me.
That's beautiful. It's filling you as you are giving. Seems like it's a reciprocal kind of relationship that you have.
What were some of those questions that you had regarding being someone who has their endiv to being a counselor? What were some of those questions?
The big push, I was working in a hospital, at the time. And a radiologist came in and said to me, my former girlfriend, I don't know, 13, 15 years ago, um, had an abortion without telling me first. And I don't know how to handle that. So we're talking about 13 years later. And I remember looking at him going, I I have I have no idea truly how to support you. Because I don't feel there was one thing really in seminary that I could responsibly, without spiritually or psychologically really um, causing more harm than good. But I knew I wanted to. I knew I wanted to help him. I knew I wanted to support him through that process. And I don't even know that I would have called it grief at the. I wouldn't have. I would not have called it grief at the time, because I had grief in such a box, right? I don't know that I would have said 13 years later, you're just starting to process your grief. And I kind of wish I could find that person now and be like, let's talk about your grief. Have you processed your grief yet? Let's talk about it.
It reminds me of the song by the Verve Pipe. I know it's a deep cut from the 90s, but The Freshman, that was actually based upon an audience, feel free to correct me, but like, I think the original story wasn't that she killed herself. It was that, uh, that she got an abortion, but didn't tell him until afterwards. And that was something that he was just grieving over, that he's like, well, I didn't, I didn't have a say. And what's up with this? We tried to wash our hands with all the mess. Sorry. But yeah, that you're right. That grief that happens where, as a therapist and an ordained minister, how do those entities inform the way you do grief work? Because you were talking about your theologies and also um, working with people amidst what would seem like spiritual and religious struggle.
Working with grievers changed in a very expansive way what I believe. This is going to be a winding answer to your question, John, but I'm going to get there. So, Faith Doesn't Erase Grief was born out of client after client after client who would come into a session and just kind of hang their head and in this posture of shame be talking about their grief. And so when I would start to explore that with them, this repeated theme was, I should not be grieving. I'm like, where is this coming from? I don't understand what you're talking about. And it was always some variance of my faith, my Christian faith says that I should be rejoicing that they're in heaven and or free of pain and or experiencing God's will and or right fill in the blank of some kind of religious cliche. And it was stalling their grief. And so when I would help them move through that and give them permission to truly experience it, there was this broadening of their experience of God. And through that, then I came to see God differently, and I came to understand grace differently. Reading scripture through the lens of a griever is a very different experience. And it just really opened, kind of shattered the box, really, is what it did. It shattered my box, which is refreshing.
What were some of the themes that started arising in Scripture? Like, of course, my initial thought is, of course, it's one of the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who grieve, for they'll be comforted. But that's one piece. What other themes did you start emerging from the Scriptures?
One of the stories that I found that was, you know how, like, there are things that we read, right, over and over and over, and then you don't notice. So the story of Joseph, after his dad dies, this journey as he goes back to bury him, tucked within that is the grief ritual that is like months long, and the community journeying with him and his brothers, grieving together, um, and mourning together and pausing, um, and you see that repeated. But also a story that I really saw very differently, in such a beautiful way, is that of Mary and Martha, in the different ways that Jesus shows up for them when they're grieving, right? So before Lazarus is returned to life, or however we want to understand that, they are grieving differently, and they have different needs in that moment, and Jesus meets them differently and approaches them differently. Even that theme of we will be met in the way that we need to be met, because we are created individually, and we are created with different personalities, and we are created, some of us very head forward, right? Logical, some of us very emotive. And we see that in Mary and Martha. One is very logical and very like, you could have saved this, you could have stopped this. And one is very just weeping, and I needed my Messiah. I needed you, and you weren't here. And we see that. And Jesus shows up in those ways. Hannah's not named as grief, but her pouring out of emotions, I think, too, is so instructional for us.
Speaking of, in individual needs and how people grieve in different ways. One of the things that I noticed in your book is how you move away from this sort of prescriptive framework of grief as stages. I think a lot of chaplains learn about stages of death and dying from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and sometimes we try to apply that to grief or think of grief in stages, and that's also keeping things in a box. So I'm wondering about how this reframe that you've made into waves of grief, how might that change the way that chaplains approach grief, and how did you come to that framework?
It started as phases, and then really incorporated this concept of waves, both of which allow for this movement, right? It's this idea that nothing about grief is linear. Nothing about grief is predictive. Nothing about grief is going to do what we want it to do. Um, you know, you can't look outside and say, oh, it is a beautiful blue sky day, perfect day to go to the beach. Nothing could possibly ruin it. And fully know that there's not going to be a storm, right? You can't do that. My wedding day was a day where all day it was blue and hot and cloudless and gorgeous. And that night we had a storm that flooded roads and closed roads. And I mean, it was like this crazy turn of things. Grief does that. And it can be on a dime. It can be because there is a scent in the air, a song in the grocery store, um, somebody walking by in a shirt that your person wore, um, a random thought that comes into your head, a phrase that somebody says, it just these things that are unpredictable.
I'm sitting with that, with everything that you're saying it resonates so much, with my personal experience, even with grief. And I think at times, for me, it's like I can't even pinpoint exactly what triggered it. It's just at some point I realized, oh, I've been thinking I'm just irritable, or I'm just mad, or these things are bothering me. But when I really think about it, it's the anniversary of the death, or it's really about grief. But even for me as a professional chaplain, it takes a while sometimes to even recognize it. So my question was about this framework of waves, grief coming in waves. How understanding that, how does that help us accompany patients who are in the grief, who are grieving in a different way?
I think a lot of it is embracing the way that we are trained to explore, right? To facilitate those safe spaces, to set the stage to ask the questions that allow people to dig in and maybe come back around to, oh, yeah, I guess it was about a year ago that we got the diagnosis, right? Because here's the thing, go back to the body keeps the score, right? Every piece of that journey, you might not realize your body is tracking all of that, but it is. And so, like clockwork, people can begin to feel. I will have clients say, I was doing so well, I don't understand what's happening. Okay, so let's look. What was going on a year ago? Yeah, this is when they stopped eating, or this is when we had to bring the hospital bed in, or this is, fill in the blank, right? Whatever big thing happened. It's us being able to ask those questions and sit with, right? I think that is a gift that we as chaplains have, is to be the ones to provide the space to allow the wave, because families oftentimes are going to rush people out of the wave. They're going to want to resolve the wave very quickly because it's uncomfortable. Families, friends. Um, I talk often about the difference between pastors and chaplains as I orient new spiritual caregivers at hospice, and that's one of them. Is I we sit, and we allow, and we give people time to be in that place until they're ready to come out of it. And that to me is what the waves, that is our role as chaplains with the waves, is to help them name it, help them identify it, and then give them permission to be in it until they don't need to be anymore.
It sounds like it's echoing some of what William Worden did with the tasks of mourning. Because, oh, right? He came and spoke one time. It was like hearing like, this says more about me, hearing like the grandfather who you really wanted to come tell stories and bestow wisdom upon you. Did you draw from William Worden in what you were talking about?
When I was a baby bereavement counselor, um, the tasks were very informative to me because they gave the tasks of mourning, there are 4 of them, they give grievers something to cling to, something to focus on when life feels completely out of control. It gives you something to do, something to aim for. That's an important thing. It gives some semblance of control when it's really hard to find any place to grab on.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because you named some practical exercises in your book for people to do or journal about. How can chaplains adapt these tools appropriately? I think you mentioned grounding practices or emotional expression. Like, what are some things that chaplains can learn and use without really, I guess, going over a boundary, where we're not professional counselors, but still accompany people in grief?
I love this question for a lot of reasons. The primary one being there are a lot of hospices that have chaplains do bereavement counseling, and it just is very difficult for me. It's important to know your boundaries. But that being said, we can help people ground and express, right? There is plenty of just pure biblical support of emotional expression. So guiding people through the process of either writing their own psalm or swapping out words. That's one of my favorite ones to do. So, for instance, using Psalm 27 And every time the word enemy arises, swap it out with whatever the disease is. That kind of thing. That is well within our training and our skill and is so beneficial for people because it gives them permission to see God in a way that says, God wants you to express how you truly feel about what's going on without projecting onto them what they feel is going on. And that's where writing their own psalm can be a beautiful experience because we don't have to say to them, write a lament. We just say, let's find a psalm that kind of resonates with you. But if it's not 100%, what would it look like for you? Follow the structure. I've been blown away because sometimes they come out as full praise and it is legitimate. It is like soul deep. And I'm like, wow, okay. That is not the direction I thought this was going to go, but fantastic. I mean, that's okay. I love that that's where you are. And sometimes they are, those pure lament psalms, right? That don't bookend in praise. Um, that are just in the depths. Sometimes they're that. Sometimes they're the battle cry. Um, so that I think is a beautiful tool that we can use at the bedside. And grounding, for people who are comfortable with maybe the more Eastern practices, I think grounding is a beautiful tool to use, meditation. But we can also incorporate them utilizing, you can do mantra breathing with a phrase like, be still and know that I am God, right? I mean, you can do that at the bedside. And that's not crossing any kind of professional boundary. That's just teaching people how to breathe and slow their nervous system, get it reset, calm them, and kind of recenter them. And we can do that.
How do you assess or see when faith, instead of supporting grief, or patients finding meaning and comfort and hope and faith, when they're actually being harmed by religious language or expectations, when it's actually harming their grief process? How do you recognize that as a chaplain?
Most of the time, I would say people are pretty clear about those people I was talking about at the beginning, right? Who want to grieve or want to express their anger or their doubt or ask their questions, but for whatever reason feel that they're not allowed to. Those are clear. And we can work with those people. I think the more challenging ones are the ones who are so adamant that they don't have any, right? They're so stoic. They're so confident in my faith. I am confident in God's plan. It's all exactly the way that it's supposed to be. There's a group for whom that is entirely true. I just don't know how big that group is. And it's really hard to parse out. And so I think as chaplains, our job is just to listen, to do that deep, deep listening to that tone underneath and to ask those reflective questions, like to maybe say, I don't hear a lot of peace underneath that. Sounds a little bit more like, is that frustration that I hear or question? I don't hear a lot of peace. And I think sometimes it's also just naming that it's okay to ask the question.
One of the areas that I've run into, I've run into family members doing this where they're, because I was the chaplain, sometimes I would assume that I want to hear certain things from them, such as, oh, well, they're in a good place. Well, no, I know they're in a better place. Sometimes when I talk with them, I'd say, yeah, but I'd kind of invite them to go, yeah, but I know it. These times can also be difficult, and that's okay. When people start opening up and they go, what are some compassionate ways if people are saying, I know they're in a better place, but I shouldn't feel this way. What are some compassionate ways for us to approach when patients and family members are saying that?
My go-to has become, they're in a better place. You are still here. You are now trying to live in a world where they are not physically present. And it is natural to need time to adjust to that. And that's not going to be easy. Knowing that they are experiencing whatever we can imagine or envision or any of that, right? Whatever comfort we take from that, that does not change that we're here trying to put it all back together, trying to figure out how to do this thing called life and readjust whatever dreams and plans that we had that are now different. And then if there's the added layer of people who fervently prayed and believed that they would be healed, and now the person has died, there is a lot that at some point will need to be explored when they're ready, right? And I think our role as a chaplain in that time is simply to say, you and your person asked God to bring healing. And I know because we talked about it, hypothetically, but I imagine, because every conversation I've had has gone this way, that you meant physical healing now on this side of heaven. And that's not what happened. So sometime, let's talk about what that means for you and for God. What does that mean for your relationship with God? And it's okay if you're a little bit hurt by that, or sad, or surprised, or let down, whatever it might be, right? Because that's a different level. And I have heard people kind of jump immediately to, well, they were just healed in a different way. That's the easy answer, right? And that's when I think if we have journeyed with them the whole time, and we have the opportunity to continue journeying with the survivors, to be able to nudge a little bit, right? Know their limits, but to nudge a little bit and say, I know that that was not the prayer. And it's okay if that's hard to accept. And just let that sit. It opens the door for them to come back at some point.
Elise and I both worked in hospice, and so there have been times where no matter what the person's faith tradition, I've seen and I've known certain deaths that were just for lack of a better term, just ugly. It was just there's nothing romanticizable about it. It's just nothing romantic about it. It's just difficult. How do you approach grief work when a patient's actual belief system is unclear or it's evolving, or even if it's in conflict with what they're experiencing?
One of my favorite interview questions for potential chaplains is this. What do you do when the adult child calls you and says, I would like you please to go pray the prayer of salvation with my father? And you know that the father, who is the patient, has already said, no, 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 I do not even want to see you. How do you handle that? Those are the opportunities. That is when, before the person dies, we have the opportunity to talk to that adult child and talk about what does your faith tradition say about how much truly does God need you, right? God, what could God be doing with your parent without you even knowing about it? What could they be doing in this in-between time that you can't hear, you can't see? That's what grace is, right? We have no idea. But I think we can trust in it, and I think we can have hope in it. And then we get to the grief. And that's when the most common thing that I hear in those grief sessions is, I think if I could trust that they were in heaven, it would help me. I usually challenge that a little bit to say, let's play that out, right? A lot of clients hate that phrase, but therapists love it. Let's play that out. What does that look like? Let's say you know that with certainty that your dad is in heaven. How does that change what's happening to you now? And what they come to see is that it really only changes that one piece. All of the other things they still have to work through. So the conflict ends up becoming, they see this kind of internal, what I'm experiencing is this internal battle between my religion and my spirituality. And then now I'm having this internal foundational struggle. And that's why, at least in the hospice world, every single bereavement assessment includes a spiritual assessment, because grief inevitably impacts spirituality. It just does.
It's a crisis of belief, and or a change at least has an impact on it somehow.
At minimum, you're thinking about it.
That makes me think about complicated grief and how sometimes you have ambiguous relationship with somebody who has died, or just it's a different, maybe it's not a death but a different kind of loss, that you have complicated feelings about. How can chaplains make space for complicated grief, or acknowledge that and help people move through those waves when it's not, I know it's not supposed to be linear for anyone, but it seems like that adds an extra uneven ground to grief.
Absolutely does. Yeah. I think the number one thing that we can do and that we get to do, this is why I love chaplaincy so much, because we get to do the things that really no other role in hospice. I know we're not all hospice chaplains, but here we are. We get to name the things that other people won't, right? So we get to name that the person who went to the doctor for a stomach ache and came out with a stage 4 pancreatic cancer diagnosis and unexpectedly retired before they meant to, not only has this diagnosis and their head is spinning, they're also grieving their retirement and what that means for their purpose and what that means for their identity. It's not just the diagnosis, right? It's all of these layers. So that's the non-death loss piece of it. There's also the truly non-death losses, retirement, divorce, just really any kind of change brings some kind of grief around. Sometimes giving it a name is gift enough, to say, you might be grieving that. Is it possible that maybe that's what's happening? That you're grieving that? And sometimes then the response is, well, why would I be grieving that? And to simply be able to say back, well, because you had something and it changed. And even if that change was the right thing, it's still a change. And it's a change from something, using divorce as an example. When you entered that marriage, you entered it with one thought, one dream, one hope, right? One intention. And even if leaving is the right thing, even if you know with certainty that ending the marriage is absolutely the 100% right thing to do, which 99% of the time, 100% of the time, it absolutely is, there still is going to be grief, because all of the dreams, all of the plans, all of the hopes that you had at the very beginning, now you have to say goodbye to. And who you were, right? You've changed. You aren't that person anymore. And so there are all these different ways that we change. Grief changes us. I think our primary gift that we can give people is just to name it, give them permission to think about things from that angle.
I think for a lot of people too, they're grieving not just what they had and they lost, but also what they didn't have, but thought they could have had, or there was a possibility that they would have, and now that's gone.
Yeah, when there's an estrangement of some kind, right? Parent, child, sibling, friendship, whatever it might be, when there's a broken relationship, estrangement, with death, there that's the finality, right? It's that removal of the one day maybe.
The possibility. Yeah.
How can chaplains then validate the experiences such as like relief or anger or ambivalence without increasing the guilt or the shame? Because a lot of times around certain faith traditions, there's a lot of guilt and shame. We've talked about it a few times. Just that I shouldn't be feeling this, or oh, I mean they're in a better place. Why am I feeling so sad? Or but so how can chaplains give that validation of their experiences?
Emotions are natural, neutral, non-negotiable, and there's a fourth N, and I just never remember all four of them. Never, ever, ever. It's ridiculous.
Notorious?
No, that'd be great though. The book is right there. But anyway, I say that because that's how we do it. We remind them that God gave us all of these emotions. These are God-given emotions that we have, that all they are doing is helping us identify that we are having some kind of reaction to whatever is happening around us. And so we simply need to acknowledge that. And it takes more effort to hold that down and to pretend that we're not experiencing it than it does to let it out, right? So it doesn't have to be logical. It doesn't have to make sense within a theological construct. Listen, if Jesus can throw a temper tantrum, the rest of us can, right? And you can call it whatever you want in the temple with the turning of the tables, but he's angry and he makes it known. The emotions themselves are not the issue, right? It's what we do with them. And if you're not harming yourself and you're not harming anybody else, experience your emotions. There's nothing wrong with them. God gave them to you and you are supposed to learn from them. You feel what you feel. And because you feel it, it's valid. It's valid the moment you feel it.
A lot of permission. A lot of basically saying grief looks different for everybody. It's okay to feel what you're feeling. It sounds like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, the only wrong way is, as long as you're not hurting yourself or others, the only wrong way to think that you're doing it wrong is to think you're doing it wrong.
The only wrong way to grieve is to just not.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because we've talked about how grief is nonlinear. It's not a stage that you move through and then you're done. So it's always going to be there. It comes in waves. Is it possible that some people still get stuck in grief though? Are there signs that somebody is not moving through the waves? And how can we support them, without trying to impose any kind of response from them?
I use the description of avoid versus distract is kind of my first layer of how we decide if somebody is stuck, right? Avoidance is, I know that I feel this thing. I know that there's this thing that I need to deal with. There is no way I'm going to. And so I'm going to continue to do whatever I can and keep myself busy to just not. So that can look like running away, keeping yourself busy, throwing yourself into work, This is quite easy for people who are caregivers for somebody else, whether that's young children or adult children who are caring for the other parent. Positive avoiders who are just gleaning all of the education they can on grief. So they're buying every book on grief. They're listening to every podcast on grief. You're buying every workbook on grief, but they're not doing, right? They're just absorbing. They're not doing. They are doing the moment somebody names the person, they're changing the subject. That's avoidance. Distraction is I just need a minute. I can't anymore today. I am depleted of all energy on this today. We are not built to be in it 24/7. We can't be in it 24/7. We need recoup time. And that's the difference, right? The difference is I felt this. I heard that song in the middle of the grocery store. I don't want another breakdown in the middle of the grocery store. I did that 2 weeks ago. I don't want to do that again. I'm going to file this away. I'm going to power through. I'm going to get my groceries, and I will deal with that when I get home. And those people later that day, when they're on their phone with their trusted somebody, will talk about it, and everything will come back to the surface and they'll get it out. The avoiders get stuck. And these are the people who, years down the road, something will happen. I see it most with adult children when the second parent dies. And now they have no one else to pour into. And so they have to. Or parents when a child dies. So one spouse takes care of the other. The spouse very healthily, the one very healthily moves through their grief, does their work, gets to a healthy place. Meanwhile, the one who's been taking care of them is just pushing and pushing and pushing. And eventually, through negative coping things, eventually kind of implodes, and years down the road is facing it for the very first time. 10 years after the child dies, is finally facing their grief for the very first time. So yeah, people do get stuck. And I think the way that we acknowledge that is I think it's asking that question, or calling people out if we have that kind of relationship, depending on how long you've known the person, to safely say, I hear a little bit of avoidance every time I bring up this person, or every time we start to talk about how you feel, you're running from it. You're not letting us talk about it. And the more you avoid it, the longer you're going to face it.
So many times being able to just basically talk very frankly with people when they're avoiding things is, if you have that level of trust, then that really deepens the kind of relationship you can have. So say we're in these very tender moments and you're walking with them and you find that their meaning making is actually leaning toward some sort of spiritual distress, or you unpack like a religious and spiritual struggle that they might have, such as some sort where they start realizing that they might be, I don't know, deconstructing their faith or something like that because it's just not working for them anymore. Um, yeah, how do you navigate those? And how do you recommend chaplains to do that?
Our greatest responsibility as chaplains is to constantly be aware of our own comfort or discomfort with those conversations. We have to be okay with people being in the place of question or doubt or anger with God. I remember feeling very confident walking into a room and saying to a woman, God is big enough to hear your anger. And I was so proud of that. And she then said to me, if God's big enough to take my anger, why wasn't God big enough to save my child? And I was like, ugh, she was in a place, right? She was in a dark place, and she had every right to be in that place. And I was a baby chaplain at that time. But I just said, I don't know. But I think that's an important thing for you to ask. I think our responsibility in those moments is, first of all, to, if we feel ourselves trying to rush people through that conversation, we have to back out of that conversation, because we need to let people go through that process at their pace, because sometimes people need to step away. The question that I ask in one of the two, maybe both of the books, I don't know, is, are you okay with not being okay with God? And if you are, that's fine. If you're not, then figure out how you can get there. But if you're okay with not being okay with God in the moment, then that's fine. Let that be. That's what we need to find out. Because it might not be distressing to them that they're disconnected from God. That's where we need to be careful, right? We can't project distress where there's disconnect. Those are not one and the same, and we have to be really careful about that.
Earlier, Kate, actually, both of you mentioned William Morden's tasks of grief. And one thing that he said that's been really helpful to me is that our relationship with the deceased doesn't end with a death, it just changes. Now that you've been doing this work for so long, what have you found to be a healthy or a good way of supporting somebody's ongoing relationship with their loved one in a healthy way?
That was when the box really smashed for me. the religious box got smashed. When I really helped clients open the door to tell me what they were experiencing, God shows up for people through the people that have died in pretty phenomenal ways. I have had experiences where I've woken up and just seen somebody sitting on the edge of the bed. I don't have a clue who they were. I just saw somebody sitting on the edge of the bed right after one of my grandpas died. I don't know if it was him, if it was an angel. I don't know who it was. I just was like, hey, fell back asleep. It was weird. My mom saw my uncle walking out of the garage. I've got many clients who have talked about pressure on their shoulder. One who talked about just an image of her husband in the car. Never long-term things, just kind of these moments, right? These reassurances. One person who had repeated conversations and dreams that this person really needed because of the nature of the death and the nature of the relationship before the death. There were things that this person really needed and got them in those conversations that happened in the dream. I had a client who, in the beginning of his process, wanted to go to heaven, not to be with God, but to be with his wife. You know, he felt so guilty about that. And I said, you know what? God created you. God brought you two together. I think God knows that. And I think God extends grace to you for that. He wrote letters to his wife every day, talked to her every day, read from her Bible every day. And then because of that space, then there was a day. It was like, I can't wait to see God. I mean, there was just this shift, right? I think the continued relationship is very real. I think that we need it more in the beginning because of that abrupt end, right? And you know this from working in hospice. Even in hospice, death surprises us, right? So we need that. There's beautiful studies in what happens in the brain. Our brain needs to learn that the person died. And so this continued relationship helps our brain do that. And we need that. And God knows that because God created our brains. As we go and as we do the work and as we continue to move forward, if we need it less and less. And I think it naturally progresses that way.
We talk about heavy things. We have a heavy job at times. I'd love to hear what is giving you life these days.
I just got back from Arizona, and that gives me life. It was a special trip, actually. It was a very rare. I have one brother. I'm married. He's married. He has 2 children, but it was a trip where for a very brief time, it was just my parents, me, and my brother. Very like I don't know the last time that happened. So it was just the 4 of us, and it was a really cool experience for that. Um, and it was the kind of vacation that I love, where because it was just me at one point, I just read. I laid at the pool and I read and I hiked. This is amazing. And I needed it. So that's what's giving me life right now. That revived me.
All right. Well, Leslie, where can people find your books, including your novels?
KateJMeyer.com has all of it. All the things.
Nice. KateJMeyer.com.
Yeah, I was excited to hear that you'd authored fiction books too. So,
A little bit of everything.
I think it helps with our work to read fiction.
well, Kate, thank you so much for your time, and I've really enjoyed the conversation we've had because I think one of the big things that I've pulled away from this is just that um, I felt like you were walking us through, almost like we received a, a bereavement counseling session from you. So that's been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I had a great time.
And now it's time for the non-anxious presence with John.
And Elise. Well, John, I feel like this conversation is so important for us, for our audience, because as you know, when chaplaincy is still very much related to end of life, death, and bereavement. We do more than that. However, that's still the moments when people really need support in a very, very obvious way. And I think that when people are starting to train as chaplains, that's also that gives you the clearest like role clarity, like purpose, to be there with people during this time. But it's also probably what gives people the most anxiety in terms of feeling unprepared to help somebody who's grieving, somebody who has been faced with a big loss. And I remember as a young chaplain thinking, well, what can I possibly say that can be comforting, or how can I possibly be helpful to somebody who's experiencing this loss or is grieving? And I just really appreciate the way that Kate has framed it as waves and not a predictable pattern or a box that people have to fit in, but how we can just be present and listen and validate wherever people are, because it really isn't about saying the right thing. There's nothing that you're going to say that's going to really solve it for people, nor should you think that that's your role. But to be able to really see where people are and to witness them in their grief, um, that's what we're there to do. What was a good takeaway for you from this conversation?
It was wonderful to hear Kate talk about being able to, as we're walking with people, giving them permission. And it's something that being able to give permission, being able to talk with them, and that emotions are going to come. And it's not bad. As long as you're not hurting yourself or someone else, feel them. And it's okay to experience that. It reminded me of when I first, it was my first it was my residency in CPE, and I remember my supervisor said, "John, as you're doing this, I want to encourage you to not run away from the uncomfortability. I want, because it seems like you're experiencing some pain as you're dealing this. So lean into that pain and be comfortable, or at least become more comfortable with experiencing the uncomfortability, because it's not something that is absolutely that we want to be a part of. Oh, give me more of this pain, this emotional feeling of being distraught. And I loved how uh, it seemed like Kate was saying, it's okay. That's one of the things that we do well as chaplains is that we sit in the midst of that. We don't try to get them to move on. We don't try to force them to go, oh, mourn, damn it. Pardon my French. We sit and we go, okay, this is what you're feeling. I'm here with you. And you're safe, and I'm a safe person to be here with you too.
I had this wonderful professor in seminary who used to tell us, it should never feel easy to do a funeral or to be with somebody who's experienced a loss, but it's important in that. I remember him saying something like, he had been with somebody with a mother whose child has died, and she said something like, "The light has gone out of my world," and he said, you may be tempted to say, no, it hasn't. Look at all these good things you got, look at your faith and whatever. But his response was, yes, it has. Just to really see where people are. The other thing that I really appreciate in this conversation and in Kate's book too is about the helpful exercises that she talks about. I love the idea of writing your own psalm. And thinking about scripture in this personalized way of, replacing something with your name or with your disease, or to pray and journal in different ways. But I also really appreciate the grounding exercises. And I know that they've been helpful for me specifically. Like when after my dad died, I remember there was a time when the only relief I ever had was when I was doing like a contemplative prayer, because otherwise my mind was so much in the past of, I wish this had happened or that hadn't happened, and regret and just all these things that were taking over my whole emotional being. But when I was meditating or doing a contemplative prayer, then my mind was finally in the present for just that like short period of time. And that was really helpful to me.
If people are experiencing that separation from God, or they're experiencing that, if they're experiencing something but it's not causing them distress, then be okay with that. let them lead their own path, so that because if the silence of God is not causing them to be is actually a peace to them, or it is not causing them pain, then perhaps that's what they need at this time.
Well, do you have a quote or a blessing for us to end this episode with?
The theme of William Worden came up repeatedly, and so I thought he had a great quote that I thought would be very appropriate, and is very encouraging to, as we do process through our grief, it's okay to give ourselves permission. And he writes, "So start out on a new life, but keep with you those cherished moments and memories as a source of joy and strength. You're stronger for having known your loved one, and you're better for having shared those years together."
Thanks, John. And thanks everybody for listening.